Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at SUSE Con 2017. Today, we have with us Michael Miller from SUSE. And the first obvious question is, can you please introduce yourself?
You bet. Hi, my name is Michael Miller. I'm President of Strategy Alliances and Marketing for SUSE.
So if you look at SUSE, it's 25 years now. On 25th. Last year we talked about 25 years of Linux, and now we're talking about 25 years of SUSE. In all those 25 years, Linux has certainly, become the dominant player out there, except for some market, only one market, I guess, which is desktop. So if you look at SUSE's history, I actually call SUSE one of the most resilient companies, because you have been through such a tough time, but you always come back, as I think Michael Jordan or somebody said, it doesn't matter how many times you fall, how many times you get up. So SUSE has been a very resilient company throughout these years. So when you look back at SUSE, how do you see your own, just to reflect on these 25 years?
Yeah, so I think, for SUSE started out with some fundamental core principles that I think are still with us, and is part of why we've been resilient. We've been through lots of changes, but we've always focused on this idea of taking all of that fantastic innovation in the open source world, which can sometimes be very chaotic, very complicated, and then translating that into something that enterprise customers can use. And that was the mission of the original SUSE organization, was to leverage open source and help enterprise companies utilize it for their business goals. And it was very services oriented in the early days, right? It was just a small group of people using upstream technology. Later, they produced a distribution. And then that philosophy is really what's held, that customer-centric, how do we take all this great technology, this open source world, and then make it available to businesses to help them further their business goals. So no matter where we've been, what inside of this company or what acquisitions have happened, or what other things happen around us, we've always kept ourselves focused on that. And I believe that if you always stay focused on what your customers need, you will ultimately be successful.
One pattern that I keep hearing from SUSE executives is also that instead of building our own stack, we always work with partners, to enable partners. So if you look at SUSE, I don't want to talk or name any competitors, but what is the unique identity of SUSE?
So one of the things that's unique, this idea of openness, it's not that we won't build things that overlap with our partners. It's that even if we do, even if a customer wants to run something from us and something from someone else, and we are competing, we're still open to that, right? So they can mix and match at all levels of the architecture to get the best solution for them. We're not going to lock in or lock out. And I think that's unique. It's part of our culture, and it's also part of how we differentiate ourselves. I mean, let's be really honest here. As a challenger in the market, we have to find ways to differentiate ourselves. And in addition to trying to differentiate around technology and optimizing technology, we also want to differentiate in how we do business. And adding that ability, that flexibility to run our operating system with someone else's infrastructure as a service, or vice versa, or with someone else's platform as a service with our infrastructure as a service, that's real value. And that's part of how we differentiate.
Now let's transition from these 25 years to the futuristic world where we all know containers are where everybody's moving. Yeah. And SUSE has SLES, but you also have Cubic, which is open source version of CASP that you announced last year. Yeah. But if you look at the overall, where the market is heading, toward the containerized world, do you see kind of either transformation or evolution of SLES itself into a containerized, or do you think that there will be because you deal with customers and all those things, so or do you think there will continue to be a mix of both? Where do you see we're heading?
So I think there'll be, for a very long time, I think there'll continue to be a mix of both, and that's why our approach that we're heading towards architecturally is to have this core of the SLES operating system that we can then morph into or adapt into these different use cases and scenarios. So this core element of SLES OS, and then in the case of containerization with our CAS product, we have Micro OS, but that's a direct evolution of the core. It's not a completely different thing, right? It's not living in two different worlds or silos. So we believe that all of those things will coexist, And that's why it's so important to have this common core that's architected, that's hardened, that's certified, and then we adapt that to these new emerging needs, and it leverages all of the benefit and investment from the core, and then it leverages the benefit of the additional technologies. That's our approach.
Right. And it's just not containers, you are also working with, I think, Cloud Foundry on the PaaS platform.
Correct.
Can you talk about, what is the engagement with the Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, so we joined Cloud Foundry, what was it, a year and a half or so, almost 2 years ago. And then with the acquisition of the Cloud Foundry platform as a service technology and talent from HPE, we were really able to accelerate our entry into that market. We were heading in that direction. That acquisition was very attractive to us because it allowed us to accelerate. We'll now be releasing our platform as a service product just around the corner. And there's some really important things that we're doing within Cloud Foundry. One is SLES-based stem cell, so that you can have all the benefits of the SUSE Linux Enterprise hardened OS all the way through your platform as a service architecture if you choose to. Again, that's another example of a kind of a different form factor built on that same core. Another thing that we think is very important is bringing together the power of containerization, orchestration with Kubernetes, and Cloud Foundry and platform as a service. And that's right now there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of different opinions about how to do that. And we're very actively engaged within the Cloud Foundry organization. Thomas DiGiacomo, our CTO, is on the Cloud Foundry board. And he's right in the middle of those conversations about how do we bring these things together. Because we don't see that as mutually exclusive technologies. We really believe there needs to be a convergence that's ultimately good for solving real-world problems. An either-or approach or a philosophical battle doesn't help customers solve problems.
You mentioned stem cell. What was that?
So I'm probably maybe not techie enough to explain it properly, but so you think about it within the microservice that you create with your application inside of Cloud Foundry is an operating system, right? So right now, upstream in Cloud Foundry, that's canonical, that's Ubuntu. Mm-hmm. And so as we've invested in Cloud Foundry and started working within the community and upstream, it makes sense for us to provide a SLE-based stem cell operating system that can be used as you're building those applications so that the operating system component of the microservice would be based on SLES.
Right. And as we talked earlier about open source has now kind of become the default, de facto.
Yeah.
So I remember my interview with Sam Ramji when he was still heading Cloud Foundry, and he said that in 5 years people may not even be using the word open source anymore because that will become obvious. They will just talk about software development. It's the that's how you write software because there's so much software to be written. You cannot do.
Yeah.
But as the adoption of open source is increasing, there of course there are established players like SUSE or Red Hat or other, but there are a lot of new companies coming in, who do consume open source, but they don't really understand how open source works. And since SUSE, those companies can be your customers, Right. So do you think there is kind of a kind of need, or suddenly there is because back in those days, okay, initially you had to tell people what is open source, then everybody knows. But suddenly now it seems like we are going back to the same cycle because these companies don't know. So
yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting. It's almost counterintuitive,
right,
in a way. And I think that from a point of view of a player like SUSE, and there's others well-established, respected open source companies in the world, and I think we all share an interest and a responsibility to help emerging companies understand open source, both in terms of consuming, but also engaging and contributing in the full cycle of open source. That's in all of our best interest. And we find that a lot of our partners who are starting to engage with open source, companies that we partner with, are actually ask us to help them understand, help them engage upstream, and help them through that process, because it's almost like they're learning, going to a new country and learning a new language or a new culture, and sometimes they need help with that.
So do you have like some kind of official, I remember back in those days there used to be, road show, not exactly road shows, but where the Novell or Red Hat, they organize a workshop in different cities, and with the ISVs and other companies. So do you still do, like, how do you educate these companies?
So there's a couple things we do. Well, SUSECon is one environment where I think we can help do that, which obviously is only once a year. But a lot of our ISV partners are starting to engage with us here. Also, we do what we call Linux Expert Days, and we go around to many, many cities in North America and in Europe, and we have one-day sessions, and the attendance to those has been fantastic. A lot of it is end customers, but it's also our partners, and they come there to learn about open source in general, the solutions in particular. They hear from other customers and partners that are using our technology. So it's not targeted only at solving that problem, but it provides a venue in which we can engage with those companies.
Let's just stay in the futuristic world. The fourth industrial revolution is kind of seen as something around machine learning and all those. And I do understand that this traditional or powerhouses like Red Hat or SUSE, they are not investing in building those technologies. So when we think about machine learning, artificial intelligence, SUSE, what role are you playing in that fourth industrial revolution?
So we partner with a lot of companies that are really interested in building those IoT and machine learning applications and turning that into services and things that they sell to their customers, right? And so those partners, those companies building those things, look to SUSE to provide an infrastructure that's on which they can run those things and which is optimized for those things. So I'll just take a partner example like SAP. Very interested in all of those topics and providing products and services to the market around data analytics and machine learning. And so we're working closely with them to make sure that our architecture, our infrastructure architecture, supports the technologies that they're building on, and that we can optimize ourselves to give them the best experience.
I just got an interesting kind of thought, and that is that how is machine learning, like machine learning is not just to build other services. You can also use machine learning to actually within the operating system or your application to be smart about whether it's like virus scanning or any vulnerability scanning or optimizing the workload. So what role is machine learning going to play in SLES itself?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating topic, right? The idea of machine learning actually being integrated into the behavior of the operating system itself, or the behavior of not just the operating system, but the infrastructure, right? So the infrastructure can actually do some self-learning, self-healing, self-configuration managing type behavior. Is quite fascinating. So that is something that we've begun talking about. As these machine learning technologies start to mature, it's one thing to support them, be the infrastructure supporting them. It's another thing to talk about how do we actually integrate those into the infrastructure, which I think will be a fascinating thing to do in the future.